Hello, everyone, and welcome. Good afternoon. This is the joint WPD and Regen webinar on the future of distributed energy in the Southwest. I hope that is the webinar you're intending to sign into. As you may have just heard in a loud voice, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording should be available once we've gone through the recordings, and they'll be posted online at the Western Power website. After this event as well, you will also be posting a report summarizing the total event, the feedback, and the slides will be available afterwards as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. My name is Frankie Mayo. I am an analyst at Regen. You'll be hearing from me and some of my Regen colleagues, as well as representatives from Western Power Distribution as well. So a bit about Regen. We are a mission-led membership organization, and we run the stakeholder engagement and analysis of the future of distributed renewable energy for this process called the DEFEZ. And DEFEZ stands for Distribution Future Energy Scenarios. That will be explained in a lot more detail soon from representatives from Western Power, but what you need to know is that we are here to discuss and get your thoughts and opinions on our scope, our details, and our assumptions so that we are accurately representing the Southwest Licence Area as part of this DEFEZ projections. The DEFEZ itself, the Distribution Future Energy Scenarios, is a key part of Western Power Distribution's strategic network investment analysis program. So the more accurate and the more credible we can make our understanding of renewable energy in the Southwest, then the better we can. So let's go through the agenda for today. You'll be hearing from Western Power Distribution, from Ben Godfrey, the network strategy for net zero future energy scenarios in the Southwest. How will the network be adapting to our national ambition for net zero by 2050? And you'll be hearing from myself and Grace Millman from Regen, and we'll be speaking about the assumptions and modelling that we will be doing to feed into Western Power's network analysis models. And we'll be running a few questions for you as well. So we'll have a Q&A session at the end. And if you want to ask questions of us, then please use the Zoom Q&A function. There should be a button on your Zoom screen. Any clarifications we will answer as we go along, but please do feed in questions for the end as and when you think of them so that you don't forget them, and also so that we have a nice long list when we get there. Any questions that we don't manage to answer in the hour and a half that we have today, we will be responding to in our follow-up report as well. But we are also here to ask questions of you and to get your opinion on some of our modelling and assumptions and the scope. So for that purpose, we are using a website called Mendycom, as you can see on your screen now. Mendycom allows us to pull up live polls, quizzes, questions, all that sort of thing, and you can answer them. So I'm going to ask you to take out your phone or open up another tab on your internet browser and go to Mendycom, and you'll see a screen very much like on the screen now and a code to add. This is super important because it allows us to capture your feedback and download it afterwards and represent it in the summary reports, as well as making sure that feeds into the analysis that we're doing. So we'll just show you that code again. So that was Mendycom and 74901015. And we'll just give you a couple of seconds to get onto that, and then we will go to our first question to make sure we're all awake this afternoon. So to begin, were you aware of the WPD Distribution Future Energy Scenarios process before today? So some of you this might be your first time hearing about this. Others of you may have dived straight into the data as well. So do fill that in as well. Great, it looks like people are finding that as well. So for those of you that aren't aware of the Western Power Distribution Future Energy Scenarios, we are going to be covering that in quite a lot of detail today. Hopefully by the end of it, you feel much more comfortable. I'll move on to the next question. What do you want to get out of today? So this is important for us. This is an evolving and hopefully improving process year on year. We did the distribution for energy scenarios with Western Power Distribution since about 2016. So each year we are trying to make sure that the stakeholder engagement events, they change. Clearly we're doing them online now, but we want to make sure you're getting the most out of them you can. So it'll take a couple of seconds for you to fill in that. Great. So I will now pass over, now we've got the hang of Menti, I'll pass on to Ben Godfrey, DSO Manager at Western Power Distribution, to talk you through the network strategy for net zero future energy scenarios at Western Power Distribution.
Excellent, thanks a lot for that, Frankie. So welcome everyone. My name is Ben Godfrey. I am the Distribution System Operator Manager for Western Power Distribution. Today we're going to go and give you a little bit of oversight and insight into the distribution future energy scenario process that we undertake as part of the strategic works within Western Power. This is primarily looking at the amount of distributed energy resources that we're expecting to collect into the southwest, making sure that we're looking at the right volume of resources and location of those resources, and also how they're going to be interacting with the different low carbon technologies that we're also forecasting. And we'll explain a bit about our methodology and our processes and how they can support local area energy planning as well. So I've got a few slides to take through, if that's okay. So while I queue that up, hopefully you'll be able to follow me in the presentation. So as I said today, what we're trying to cover is looking at the future energy scenarios and why we need to undertake this process, looking at some of the outputs and the materials that we can make available, and then allowing you to understand how we use this process and how it interacts with other scenario frameworks that are operated both nationally and locally. So the future energy scenarios is a real key part of the work that we do to understand the strategic development needs of the distribution network. So we are responsible for facilitating the electricity needs, and that really enables us to understand how much capacity we need to serve all the power requirements across the network. But in order to actually understand and facilitate the decarbonisation, we need to convert that into energy requirements and understand the likely energy supply mix. And that kind of accurate forecasting allows us to be able to better inform the strategic investment that we're going to need to be required in order to ensure that all of the future renewables and low carbon technologies can be accommodated down in the southwest. And it's particularly important that we don't just limit ourselves to a single vision of what that future might be, because there's lots of different technologies that are coming on board and have the potential to be delivered within the southwest. So we need to make sure that we've got a credible range of those future scenarios in order to look at all the potential outcomes that might be developed out for the next 20 or 30 years. And the key bit around this multiple scenarios is that there will be different clustering of different technologies, different uptakes of renewables and non-renewables across all of our different license areas within the Western Power region. And we need to make sure that our network and the investment that we're putting in place now can be resilient across any of those particular outcomes and those future scenarios. So by considering a range of those scenarios, we are then able to ensure that our investment processes develop investment requirements on our network that are resilient and can be delivered through low regret growth across a number of different futures. So diving into the distribution future energy scenario process, what we really do is we take the whole of our region and we split that up into different electricity supply areas. So these are geographic boundaries. We've got roughly 1,200 across the whole of WPD, and they represent each of the primary substation areas, which is a sort of 33 to 11 kV voltage area. So roughly somewhere in the region of about 7,000 to 10,000 customers that we've got across those particular areas. And these are the building blocks that we're able to build up and understand what we think is going to happen in that particular locality. And then what we're able to do using those different building blocks is look at how that is going to be affected in terms of supply area, technologies, scenarios and years. And we can publish all of this information so that we can more accurately understand what the likely future of renewables and low carbon technologies are across these different scenarios and across the different timescales. And that will build up a rich picture of information that we can share. And the outputs of that information really, I think, is the critical bit for us, is to ensure that everyone within our region has the visibility about what we're predicting, so that when those other organisations that are leading decarbonisation, either from a local government or a particular major user, stakeholder, or even a community interest, can understand that there is sufficient plans to be able to invest in the network, to be able to accommodate all those different technologies. So whether you're one of those aforementioned organisations or even just a personal user, you should really be confident that we are building out enough infrastructure to be able to accommodate all the electric vehicles, all the heat pumps, all the solar, the wind, and the different generation mixes that are going to enable decarbonisation. So as well as providing that kind of published and open data set, we also distill that information down into a number of different reports. So we have a stakeholder engagement summary report, which explains the methods about how we are, the methods of engagement that we've used with the different stakeholders and the results for that, so that you can be confident that the picture that we're providing is very rich and detailed and led by that engagement with our stakeholders. We also provide a methodology slide pack, and that there is specifically to look at the methodology of how we derive those results. So looking at the different technologies, taking the information from the local plans of our stakeholders, the local authorities, and ensuring that we are using a number of different external data sets to merge all that information together so that we can get a good representative view. That methodology slide pack sort of explains the end-to-end process. We then also provide specific details on the technology and the summary that we're doing. So that is looking at how we've distributed, say, electric vehicles or heat pumps around the network and around the different regions, and explain what the likely forecasts for the uptake of those technologies are all the way out to 2050. And then finally, we also do a regional review. So this looks at the licence area as a whole and provides some real aggregate figures on how we expect the major technologies to be changing over the next 30 years. So that sets the high level ambition of how many of heat pumps or how much wind and solar might be developed in terms of megawatts across the area. And that provides high level infographics for what we're expecting to be delivered within that particular license area. And the important thing is once we've understand the volumes of all those low carbon technologies, so once we've got a picture of how many of the technologies are being connected and where they're going to be connecting, the next part of that supply process is for us to understand the impact on the network. So in order to do that, we translate that volume data into electrical behavior so that we can model it over our network. This is a new bit of work that we put a lot of effort into earlier on in the year to be able to provide these customer behavior technology assumptions. So for every home, industrial premises and low carbon technology and distributed energy resource technology, we provide an annual profile about how we expect that to be operating. And that enables us to be able to model the electrical characteristics on the network so that we're building enough capacity out to be able to accommodate all that. So the customer behavior profiles and assumptions report really details all of our assumptions behind that. And so you can be very sure that the impact on the network is one that will be able to deliver all, will be able to distribute all the energy that we expect to be created and consumed within the local area. And that enables us to really get a good picture about what overhead lines, underground cables, transformers, and other associated electrical infrastructure will need to be changed and upgraded over the next few years to be able to continue to keep the lights on into the southwest. And that is a real rich source of information for us to use internally. So we very much base our investment plans off the back of the local area energy plans and any of the local government and planning data that we go and get from various discussions and published data sets that we exchange. We also supplement that with our WPD connections data and our stakeholder engagement in order to really understand what we expect the distribution of those technologies are going to be in our network. And then by taking that data, we can then use that to understand the network impacts through that network analysis that we said. And then that really forms the basis of all of our regulatory reporting, all of our flexibility signposting, and all of our regulatory submissions to both the regulator and to National Grid, the electricity system operator, to ensure that there is sufficient electrical infrastructure and electrical system capability to be able to manage all those things going forward across a number of credible different energy scenarios. And by taking all of that information and serving that up across the industry, it really means that we're taking the local information and the local expectations about what is going to be happening in the future of the Southwest, and ensuring that information is percolated across the whole of the electricity system, so notably both to the regulator and also National Grid ESO. This information also heavily informs our future business plan. So our business plan for our next price control will be published at the end of the month. We've gone through a number of iterations and revisions to date, which you can download from our website today. And that will really start to show the level of expenditure that we are expecting that will be required in order to facilitate all the decarbonisation aims of all the local authorities, the national projections, and all the stakeholders that we've engaged with within the Southwest and other WPD licence areas. That best view that we have that explains that particular expectation forms a core part of our business plan and really derives all of our network investment that we're putting forward. And this best view really is the central part of the investment figures that we're putting forward into our business plan. The best view, it isn't just a single scenario that we kind of arbitrarily apply across all of our license area. The best view is very much built from a bottom up using all the information that we have from the local authorities and the local area energy plans, but also the engagement that we do with all the businesses and major stakeholders within our region to be able to assign a particular DEFEZ scenario for a local authority area. And that allows us to provide a kind of blended view at a license area level in order to understand what we think the likely trajectory of all these different technologies is going to be in the Southwest. And that very much is the view that we're putting forward for our ED2 business plan, which will explain all of the investment that we require and the locations and areas where we require that investment to put forward a credible business case to the regulator to make sure that we can still deliver the same level of service and facilitate decarbonisation of the Southwest and the other WPD licence areas out till 2028. But of course, scenario planning isn't just the job of WPD. We also integrate quite heavily with the national scenarios created by National Grid underneath their Future Energy Scenario Framework. So we use exactly the same Future Energy Framework to be able to understand all the socio and political variances of the different pathways to net zero that we might be taking. And we take that framework on a national level, but we use our bottom-up information sourced from all of our local stakeholders to be able to understand the mapping and the regionalisation of those national scenarios, so how they're exactly going to be impacted within each of our individual licence areas. We've also done some work to align our DEFEZ to not just the FEZ, but also the Committee on Climate Change Fixed Carbon Budget as well. So we've got a very robust view now on how the FEZ and the Committee on Climate Change pathways to net zero interact, and they can be shown to be reflected in the information and investment plans that we're putting forward for our next price control. And finally, the last slide I want to present today is just focus on the local area energy planning and how the DEFEZ interacts with that. So we very much see that the distribution future energy scenario work provides a very good framework and provides a link between actions on the ground, so local area-led planning, and also the national scenario framework as well, that sets the basis of all of this volume of work. And the interaction between the DEFEZ and the local area energy planning really is to try and match and mirror those, best reflect all of the local area energy plans into our DEFEZ and ensure that there is cross-pollination between what's actually happening at a local level, mapping it through at a regional level and a DNO license area level, and ensuring that that fits in well with what the national requirements are. So delivery points on the government's 10-point plan and other kind of interactions with that. So hopefully that's given you a really good overview of the distribution future energy scenario process and how important this work is in terms of informing both what WPD do, but also how the electricity system is going to evolve to meet the decarbonisation needs of the Southwest. What we're going to be doing over the next few minutes is we've got some further questions to start asking about the process and some of the information that we're providing, and hopefully that should be hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit more engagement from you today to make sure that we're meeting all of your needs and ensure that you have good visibility about the processes that we're working through.
Hello, everyone. So thank you so much to those who have started and got engaged with Menti so far. For any late joiners, menti.com and the code at the top of the screen is how you will answer this and all the following questions in the slides. So as you've just heard Ben speak about, there's a wide range of publications from the DEFEZ process and also lots of different opportunities to get engaged. So this is how would you rate your level of engagement with WPD? So just hop onto menti.com, type in the code at the top, and you'll be able to answer this question. While we wait for some more answers to filter in, we have been getting some questions via the Q&A and the Zoom chat. Do remember to put them into the Q&A, as we'll be able to have a better record of them and record them in the following up report as well. For most questions, we'll be running the Q&A session at the end, but clarifications we'll get to as we go. Okay, just a few more seconds on that. So an interesting mix there. So roughly 50-50 well engaged and under engaged, and hopefully this is an opportunity for those feeling under engaged to have another chance to chat to Western Power and Regen about this DEFEZ process. We'll move on to one more Menti question now. Which is, in your opinion, how well do you understand the relationship between National Grid FERS, WPD DEFEZ, and local area energy planning? And this is really for us to get a temperature check on the presentation of the results and the methodology as we go through. While we wait for answers to filter in, there's a clarification in the chat there that I'll just get to. So the slides will be shared at the end of the presentation. A recording as well will also be shared, and we're producing a follow-up report just to summarize the key findings of these polls. So maybe as no surprise, there is a range of answers to this, but we all sort of sit in and around the middle, and I think that's completely fair enough. Thanks very much, everyone, for filling in those questions. We will be rounding up those Menti questions, but there will be more throughout, so please do keep a tab open or your phone out for further engagement. Okay, let's move on. So this is sort of an open-ended Menti question, but also just one to have a think about and do feedback to us after the event if you have further thoughts. So we go through this analysis process and produce the data set of future renewable and distributed generation and demand connections in the Southwest. That then goes through the network planning, as you've heard from Ben Godfrey, and this is output back published online for the DEFEZ data set, which is available through the Western Power Map Hub. We also produce a methodology slide pack and specific summary reports, as well as the engagement event summary reports as well. So do have a think about that, if they're useful or if they're slightly different outputs that would be useful to you as well, or which particular one. So I'm going to speak now and be joined by my colleague Grace Millman. Some detail about renewable energy and a few other technologies, distributed demand, bioenergy, flexibility and storage in the Southwest license area. Hopefully this will satisfy the needs of those roughly 30% of people who have come along wanting to find out more about renewable energy and distributed generation and connections in the Southwest. As you've heard from Western Power so far, that the DEFEZ is aligned with the national grid FES, basically. So DEFEZ Distribution FES Future Energy Scenarios Framework. So each of these 4 scenarios has various assumptions around the societal and economic levers. 3 of them achieve net zero by at least 2050, as in line with the government target set, and 1 of them, steady progression, does not meet. And part of our job here is to work out the unique and wonderful characteristics of the Southwest and see how that compares and how we should augment and update the national picture so that it is relevant and credible at a Southwest level. A brief note on methodology. So we have a timeline out to 2050 for these DEFEZ projections. We look at historic data from the past up until present by technology, so we can get a good idea of the rate of progress and development and deployment by technology type. We also speak to developers, to local authorities, and this is one of those many events where we have an opportunity to get your opinion on why things have been developed the way they have in the Southwest. We take that information and we combine it with planning permission applications or grid connection offers and acceptances to see what's going to happen in the really near term. You know, what projects are almost built or going to be built. And as part of this, we don't only look at generation and demand, we're also looking at new housing and non-domestic properties, commercial industrial properties as well, in the local authority plans. So the near-term period, sometimes called a pipeline in some of these slides, is the site, the range of sites that we have most credible understanding of. After that, into the medium and long term, that's the realm and the benefits of having the scenarios, because it becomes much more uncertain. So we have that broad envelope of scenarios, some that reach net zero earlier, some that don't. And within that, we believe we can find a credible pathway for the Southwest. So let's move on to the scope. So we have on your screen here a brief description of all of the different assets, which are sometimes referred to as building blocks that make up the DEFEZ. We're looking at generation, we're looking at demand, new housing and commercial properties, as I said, battery and other non-battery energy storage, and it's not just renewables, but fossil fuels as well. We're also really interested in those disruptive new players in the demand space, so electric vehicle chargers of all different types, as well as electrified heat. We are interested in connections to the electricity network, to be clear, for this at the distribution level. So we're not including large-scale nuclear power plants, if you can think of any in the Southwest, because they do not connect to the distribution network, just in case you're wondering whether we got to that or not. And a third and critical part of the DEFEZ methodology is the key role of stakeholders. A very easy way to get a generic regional picture would be to take the national projections from the government and divide it by 10, and then that's your local picture, but it's clearly not accurate, and clearly we want to be representing something that's actually cognizant of the regional characteristics in the Southwest. So where is it sunny, where is the wind blow, where are new developments taking place, and where have historically wind farms, solar farms been focused. So the key role of stakeholders is to us to engage and to validate and critique our assumptions. We want to, as you can see, they reflect regional variations, test our assumptions, and those really are technology by technology specific as well. With that in mind, we have another Menti question. So this one's a bit more of an open-ended one, and there's a chance to fill in the areas of energy that you have knowledge of or interest in. We do cover a really broad range in the DEFEZ, and we can't speak about all of them in these events. But we want to get an idea of the things that you're interested in so that we can make sure our information sharing is as relevant as possible. So do just take a moment on menti.com, taking that code that's at the top of your screen, also been pushed into the chat as well, I believe. And there we go on screen there, menti.com 7490 1015. And just take a moment to have a think about which areas you have the most interest in or knowledge in as well. Lovely to see that word cloud slowly forming there. You see a lot, offshore wind, onshore wind, definitely going to be speaking about solar, wind, heat pumps there in this presentation as well, and many, many more. We'll take another few moments on that question because there's lots of great answers coming in. Lovely. Okay, so you can still answer that question for the moment, but we're going to move on. Any questions that you do think of an answer for, you can always get in touch with us or drop a question in the Q&A on the Zoom window as well. Please do. So we're now going to cover the history and the data of a particular subset of renewable energy generation and bioenergy, flexibility and demand technologies. As I said, we can't cover them all. We would be here for hours and hours and hours. So just for our short hour and a half session, we're going to cover a few technologies that are most relevant to the local area. I'll be speaking first about renewable generation. So there's a map appearing on your screen that is absolutely plastered in renewable generation. And maybe if you've been driving around the Southwest, this might look familiar to you. So we have wind, solar, bioenergy, all across this map. And one thing to note is the blue is baseline, that is operational sites that have been built to date or to April 2021. And green are those sites that we are aware of in the pipeline that either have applied for planning permission or have an accepted network connection. So those are the ones that we're interested in for really critiquing when are they going to come, when are they going to connect, and what are the key factors in changing that. So we know from the Southwest large areas of development, and this is to do not just where there is network, but also other social factors as well. So you can clearly see planning permission, Bodmin, Dartmoor, Exmoor, all been avoided. Also around urban areas, solar farms and wind farms clearly don't have to be built from like a buffering distance and that sort of stuff. So once we begin to spatially analyze the development of these technologies, we can take that forward and think, okay, so where are they going to be built in the future under a certain set of assumptions? Each of those is a DEFEZ scenario. But this map is very complicated, so we shall move on to one that is slightly more focused, and this is just on what is referred to as ground-mounted solar PVs, that's solar farms. And as we can see, a high level of density of solar farms in Cornwall can be seen. Again, those are the blue areas. That's small and medium-sized solar farms built under the FITs up to large amounts and up to 5 megawatts. And we really saw that deployment really kicking off in the 2014 onwards. Other trends you can see following the network and the motorway up from Devon through to Somerset. And interestingly, fewer but larger sites in the pipeline. So not nearly as many small and medium sites, still a large amount capacity of sites, but these are smaller and more concentrated. So to look at the data and the historic growth, we'll see over time, large amounts of growth in the early period on the graph, as you can see, really does kick off, but much slower deployment in recent years in the Southwest licence area. However, a positive story, this large amount of deployment is almost mirrored in that green bar, which is the amount that we have identified in the pipeline. So these are sites with a connection offer. Maybe they have planning permission, maybe they don't. We will be going out and speaking to these developers and speaking to local authorities as well to get a picture of when these might connect. So there's almost a potential doubling in capacity in the Southwest if these pipeline sites were to go ahead. However, we do want to understand the assumptions and the factors that will go into play to see if are they going to be built this year, next year, what's the reasons for delay, or yes, when they're going to be built out. If you have particular thoughts on solar, then the next question is for you. We have this large pipeline of solar sites, and we know there are some key factors in when they might go ahead. Planning permission, the grid connection offer, but in your opinion, this large scale solar pipeline, when might these start connecting? So if you have particular interest in this, or if you're a developer yourself, clearly we have a strange year last year, and many sites that would have gone ahead have been delayed, but is there a wider delay across the license area anyway? So we'll take a few moments to go through that question. So a range of answers. Mostly we're sitting in the early mid 2020s with some answers, yes, optimistic, a range of optimism there as we split across the 2030s. This is incredibly useful, and thank you so much for taking time to fill this out. We did ask this question last year in the previous round of DEFEZ, and it's really interesting to see that sort of comparison and to see what has changed. Take a few more seconds on that before we move on to the next technology. So that was solar farms, large scale, above 1 megawatt sites. If we look at the deployment of rooftop solar PV, this similar trajectory with really explosive growth in the early 2010s. That has been slowing down in recent years for with the reduction of the feed-in tariff and the removal of subsidies. We are still seeing some level of deployment. There are some groups still deploying this, and we know community energy groups, for example, have been installing on potentially not just domestic, but non-domestic schools and hospitals as well. However, it's much lower. We're really interested in the factors that are changing in terms of what's motivating people to install rooftop solar PV. So the smart export guarantee wasn't around for a few years ago. Is that going to change anything, or are we going to go into a period of slower decline? However, in that realm of growth, we're aware of a few key factors that have historically really defined where within the Southwest deployment of rooftop solar PV has been concentrated. So here's another Menti question for you. These are our factors that we've identified through the spatial analysis. So we see home ownership being a real key category, but also building type as well, obviously compared to like flats, compared to terrace housing, compared to semi-detached and detached housing. Really interesting there that as an early response, EV ownership could well be correlated with solar panels on people's roofs, and maybe domestic batteries in their homes as well. But is that as important, which we'd like to know, as building type and home ownership? We have seen very high growth in some areas with social housing, and social landlords have cottoned on to the feed-in tariff deployments in the early years. Is that still going to be a factor moving forward? We are getting lots of questions in the Q&A as well, which is great. So thanks everyone for putting those in. We'll take a few more seconds on that question and then we'll be moving on. So next up we have onshore wind farms in the Southwest, and this is the spatial distribution of sites that have historically been deployed in blue and operational, and then a few sites in green, which are the sites that have a connection offer or are active in the planning application process. As you can see, there's quite a strong deployment across the north coast, North Devon, Somerset and Cornwall. Small and medium sites, but also a few very large sites as well. Maybe some of those you recognise local to yourselves. A few more detail on that. This is the deployment that we've seen for onshore winds in the last decade. So a similar picture to rooftop PV that I just presented. We have a high level of deployment in a few large steps, which is those larger sites you saw, and then small and medium sites as well. But for a raft of reasons, but sort of a negative planning regime and lack of direct subsidies, we've seen a slowing down in the last few years. Not as dramatic a pipeline as with solar farms, but as you can see there in the green bar, we still have sites that will and may connect in the next few years. as you can see there, a few stats around those as well. So having presented that data, this is the trajectory up until this date, the spatial distribution as well. We'll ask another Menti question. So everyone back onto the phones, and there's a few reasons there that I specified, and if you have particular thoughts on the key factors for onshore wind deployment, other than planning and financial subsidies, then please do get in touch. But in general, when might distributed onshore wind deployment in England pick up again? We are talking about England here in the southwest. We know it's a different story in Wales and Scotland as well, but just focusing in on England and the southwest at this point. Lovely. Okay, we'll wait a few more seconds and then we'll move on. Thank you so much, everyone, for engaging in this Menti. It is really great that you're all feeding in, and really great to see all these questions flooding in into the Q&A session as well. Okay, I'm going to move on now to Grace Millman, who is Energy Analyst at Regen, and is going to talk you through the wonderful world of bioenergy.
Thanks, Frankie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. As Frank says, I'm an Energy Analyst at Regen, and I'm going to be talking about some of the bioenergy and flexibility technologies today. So, as Frankie just said, bioenergy first. Bioenergy can play an extremely important role in achieving net zero emissions, and it can be used in many different ways. So, for example, we've got some examples here. Industrial and residential heat, it can be used as a transport fuel. It can be used in the production of hydrogen, which is obviously a very popular topic at the moment, if not a bit controversial. It can be used as a form of carbon capture and storage. And specifically for our DEFEZ analysis, it can be used as a form of power generation. So going back on Menti, we're going to get your opinion on what you think the long-term role of distribution scale bioenergy electricity generation will be. So we've got a few different options here, a few different scenarios. It can play a limited or reduced role, either because the bioenergy is prioritised for higher value uses than electricity generation, or to do with the finite resources available. Does it have a role that you believe will be similar to today, so with on-site generation at farms, sewage plants and waste centres? Or do you actually think the role of bioenergy is going to expand in the future as a form of low carbon, dispatchable and flexible generation? So when we do our analysis, we do different scenario work as we are basing them on the FES scenarios. So we try and think about the role they're playing, but also why and how the technologies interact with each other. So it's great to get your feedback on this kind of thing. Perfect. Okay, so we've got about 45 responses there, which is great. And remember to keep putting questions in the Q&A as well. So I think we've got quite an overwhelming majority there, similar to the role it plays today. So that's great. Thank you so much. Cool. Okie dokes. So we're now going to move on to flexibility and storage. And we're going to talk about a few different things within flexibility and storage because, as I'm sure you're all well aware, it's not necessarily a low carbon technology. And we actually do look at fossil fuel flexibility, including gas and diesel generators. And we look at their role in the future energy scenarios, and then the role of more low carbon battery and alternative storage technologies. So you can see from this map here that there is a transition happening. So as Frankie mentioned, the blue sites here are baseline sites, so operational sites. And we can see that a lot of these are fossil gas and diesel. And we can see that moving to the pipeline, moving to the green sites, actually there's not many fossil gas and diesel sites, as I hope we are well aware, but there are lots of these low carbon storage sites coming on. And these are also of significant capacity. So you can see a lot of those pipeline sites are about 50 megawatts. So they are large storage sites looking to connect. You can see on the map there as well that a lot of these will maybe potentially co-locate with existing or new renewable generation. So looking at the gas-fired power specifically now, we can see that we've got quite a lot already connected in the southwest, mainly in the northern parts of the licence area, so Somerset and South Gloucestershire. And these generators tend to be located around urban areas. And then looking at the looking at the baseline we have for this, the existing operational sites, we can see that there was an increase in gas generation capacity from about 2015 onwards, rising from about 200 megawatts to nearly 350 megawatts within the southwest. And looking at the sites that WPD have in their data around future pipeline sites, we can see that there were sites accepted to connect in 2017, 2018 and 2019, but these have not yet connected. And we can also see that there were no projects accepted in 2020. So what we're looking at with gas is the future scenario that it will play in net zero, so or in the future energy scenario, sorry. So obviously to reach net zero, we can't be using gas generation, but it's how will this happen? How will this phase out happen? So I'm going to ask some of your opinions on that next. So again, we've got a few different scenarios here. So do we think that there'll be limited development, as I said, due to the national and regional net zero targets that we've set? Obviously, the Southwest has quite a lot of local area energy targets and things like that, but also obviously the national net zero target. Will it continue to develop at a steady state as seen over the last few years? As I said, from 2015, there has been an increase in generation, although this may be levelling off now. Or do you actually think that the development of flexible gas-fired generation will increase? In particular, to provide that flexible dispatchable generation that maybe we need to counteract some of the variability in renewable generation. I think I saw in the chat as well someone saying, in a net zero scenario, can we have gas? No, in its purest form. But actually, how will this happen and how will this phase out, and what will we see in the near term and past that? Because obviously our projections are out to 2050, but it's not necessarily a linear downward trend from now onwards. And I just saw another comment as well there in the chat. This is your opinion, what you think will happen. And we can use this to inform our decisions and to provide evidence as to why we model different technologies in different ways. Perfect, thank you. So I think, yes, I think we're mostly in agreement that there should be limited development due to our national and regional net zero targets, but also acknowledgement that that might not necessarily be how it happens. Okay, great. I'm going to move on now to diesel generation. So we're still on the fossil fuels. And what we're talking about, and the reason we modeled diesel generation is because, again, it's about the potential future of it and the role that it has. And there has recently been quite a lot of change in the diesel generation policy world. So there are stringent environmental permitting regulations and emission reduction targets at the moment. So for example, or in particular, the Medium Combustion Plant Directive has been passed into law. And this now places air quality requirements and permitting regulations onto commercial medium scale diesel generators, such that they now have an emissions limit that they have to adhere to, and they also have to monitor and report on these emissions. So in light of the NCPD, in terms of those regulations that I just mentioned, I'd like to get your opinions on what you think will happen to the current commercial medium scale diesel generation sites. So these are sites that are already operating now, but are being impacted by the MCPD. So will they transition to another technology? So for example, battery storage, gas, or even hydrogen production. Obviously, preferably we want them to move towards a low carbon one, but that's not necessarily the case. Do we think that they will keep their connection and assets, keep their grid connection, but then operate with emissions controls and abatement technology? Or do we think they will completely decommission? So as I said, the MCPD is putting on regulations and limits on the emissions that they can produce. So it will make it more expensive for them to operate and add extra barriers for their operation. So interestingly, a lot of you think that they will transition to another technology. I suppose this is around, obviously, the difficulty in decommissioning and loss of assets and the loss of the plant itself. And something like, hydrogen generation could be an interesting low carbon form of this generation sites. Okay, great. So we've got about 40 votes there. So I think I'm going to move on, but great. Keep putting questions in the Q&A and we will respond to these at the end. I know that obviously the phasing out of gas and diesel is something we all want to happen, but actually it's very interesting to know how it will or how we think it will happen. So please do keep putting comments and questions in the Q&A. So now that we've covered fossil fuel-based flexible generation, we're now going to move on to electricity storage. So for example, as I said, this is low carbon battery storage, and we can see that there's not many operational baseline sites already, 3 or 4 there, but the majority come in the pipeline. So these are sites that have a connection offer, but they've not yet connected and they're not yet operational. And again, as I said before, we can see that these are mostly around 50 megawatts, which is quite significant in scale and provides a big opportunity for electricity storage. In terms of electricity storage, there are different business models that developers can use. So we have 4 here that we've outlined, and these are the ones that we use in our modelling. On the multi-megawatt scale, so those 50 megawatt ones I was just talking about, it's likely to be a standalone network service battery. So this is providing balancing, flexibility and support services to the grid as its source of revenue in and of itself. They can also be co-located with renewable energy generation projects. And these help the generators to optimize their assets and could be a solution going forward. Then on a single megawatt scale, we have what we would consider a high energy user. So this is when the battery is located on site to help manage their energy generation. And then on going down quite a bit here, going down to the tens of kilowatt scale, we have a domestic business model where they are issued alongside domestic solar installations or can provide backup services on the domestic scale. So out of those business models, I'd really like to see where you think the most growth will be in the near and medium term in the Southwest in terms of battery storage. So as I've just mentioned, I'll go through them again. We have standalone, so these are multi-megawatt batteries that provide grid flexibility services. Co-location, so again, multi-megawatts, but co-located with an existing or new renewable generation sites. A high energy user where it's co-located with an industrial user in order to help them with their generation, or domestic, so these are small scale, a few kilowatts, located in houses. Okay, great. So far we're seeing quite a big drive towards the co-location and the standalone. So these are the big scale batteries. I think that would be amazing for our future energy scenarios and the flexibility that we could start to gain if we were getting 50 megawatt batteries on the grid. And the co-location is a really good one because in our modelling, not only do we give projections of numbers, but we distribute these out obviously as distribution future energy scenarios. And using co-location and knowing that this is a driver for the location of batteries is a great thing for us to be able to use in our modelling. Perfect, thank you. So yeah, we got some great responses there and a good number of responses. See if we've got any more coming in. Oh, perfect, thank you, Hannah. So yeah, so if anyone isn't on Menti at the moment, go to www.mendy.com and use the code 74901015. So just to mention there, we're talking in the capacity of the connection that they have. So it would be a 50 megawatt connection that the battery would have to the distribution network. Perfect. Okay, cool. I think we've got a good amount of votes there and a bit of a stall in that, so I'm going to move on. So here we were talking about battery storage in particular, but there was also alternative energy storage technologies that are starting to pop up and starting to contribute to the energy system. So I'll go through a few of these. We have pumped hydropower. So this is based on a closed loop system using gravitational potential energy to get water from a higher reservoir and lower reservoir. Then we have flywheels, which use kinetic energy, and they basically have a rotating mass in the center of a flywheel, and this is held in a vacuum, and these can provide power for a matter of seconds, but quite quickly and kind of instantaneously. Then we have compressed air energy storage as the next one. So this is similar to pumped hydro in the terms of it's using the two different gravitational potential energies. However, it's pumping water to higher ground and the air is compressed. So this uses quite a lot of space because you're having to dig quite big caves and stuff underground as the storage medium. Next on, we've got flow batteries, which are electrolyte-based storage technologies, and these can be instantly recharged, so it could be quite a good use of demand-side response. Then we've got liquid air energy storage here. So this is based on the compressing and liquefying of air, which is then stored in these highly insulated high-pressure tanks. This has several hours of duration as a technology, and also the ability to provide inertia. So, and then finally, I've got on here power to X. So this is describing the conversion of electricity into another material. So for example, hydrogen, without necessarily requiring it to convert that back to electricity. For example, in the case of hydrogen, you could store electricity as hydrogen, but then use the hydrogen itself as a high value commodity. So take a bit of a moment just to get some of these in your head, because we're going to be asking a question about them next. But just going back to the pumped hydropower, as Frankie said earlier, we're talking about distribution scale technologies, so things connecting to the distribution network, not the transmission network. So when we do talk about pumped hydro in this sense, we're talking about small scale pumped hydropower, and similarly with the liquid air one as well. Great, so on those technologies, what we'd like to know is which ones of these do you see having some deployment on the distribution network in the future? So these can be, you can vote for multiple of these. So which ones of those technologies do you see as having some deployment? Flow batteries seeming very popular there. And also power to X. So this is a really interesting area because it is massively growing. It's fairly new compared to maybe some of the other technologies we've talked about, especially compared to, gas and diesel. But it has the ability to provide flexibility services to the grid, which will be extremely important in a net zero future. So we've got, the main ones there are power to X and flow batteries. As I said before, liquid air energy storage and small scale pumped hydro, they would be the smaller scale ones for the distribution network. So we might see that if this was the transmission network question, it might be a completely different answer. Great, I think we've got some really good responses there. A mix as well, and I think that is the solution at the end of the day, is with all of these technologies, it will be a mix of these. It won't be one option to serve everyone. And also, obviously, it is based on regional requirements. So it might be in Cornwall, you see one thing, and in Devon, you see something else. So I think the mix of answers there is really a good representation of what we're trying to do in our modelling. Perfect. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to move on now. So we're now moving on to domestic technologies. So we're going to look at electrified domestic heating. So there's been a lot of talk about decarbonisation of heat, and it's actually one of the greatest challenges we're facing at the moment in terms of meeting net zero emissions. There's been considerable discussion of it in government and in UK policy, and we are expecting the heat and building strategy out of BEIS in the coming months, which will hopefully provide a lot of clarity on these ambitions. In the Energy White Paper, which I'm sure many of you have seen, the UK government announced their ambition to install 600,000 heat pumps a year by 2028. This is rising from the current installation rate of 30,000 per year. So you can see in the graphic on the left here that it is a large incline that we have to have. It is a steep incline as well. There's got to be rapid deployment in the next few years. And hopefully the heat and building strategy will provide some more information on that. There's also the ambition to phase out high carbon fossil heating in off-gas properties in the 2020s, and the Future Homes Standard, which I know has already been mentioned in a few of the questions and the comments, that will require new homes to install low carbon heating. We're hoping that that would come into force from 2025. Obviously, in order to get this installation rate and also to decarbonise our heating, sufficient support is needed from government. And although there has been support schemes previously, so for example, the domestic RHI, we can see that, you know, up to now, it's only supported 55,000 heat pump installations. So a long way off the 600,000 a year the government are looking for. Looking now at the Southwest specifically, you see here that the proportion of homes with a heat pump is linked to off-gas areas mainly, as many of these are currently using oil, solid fuel, biomass or LPG, for example. For example, you can see down in Cornwall, Cornwall has a particularly high uptake of ground source heat pumps because nearly 50% of the county is off-gas. In on-gas areas and urban areas, then gas is still the preferred heating method, as well as resistive electric heating. And in the Southwest, around 1% of homes in the Southwest have a heat pump, which is twice the national average, which is amazing progress so far, but we can also see the scale of the challenge there, that currently only 1% have heat pumps. So we're going to go back onto Menti now, and talking about that target of 600,000 heat pumps installed per year by 2028. Which of these areas do you think should be or will be targeted first, so which of these areas will be targeted first? So do we think it's going to be off-gas fossil fuel housing? Off-gas houses that are currently using fossil fuel heating, all off-gas housing? Do we think it will be focused on on-gas houses? Social housing, where the fuel type is traditionally determined by a government authority or local authority? New building housing, and this could be in line with the Future Homes Standard? Or households in fuel poverty, who tend to traditionally be on expensive forms of heating and also are at risk of being disadvantaged by the energy transition to net zero anyway. So do we think that there will be a focus on them to keep them in line with net zero targets? Okay, so we've got a few here. We've got, I'll give you a bit of time to answer this one. I know there's a lot of options here and a lot of things to answer. But we can see we've got a bit of a tilt towards new build housing and off-gas housing on fossil fuel heating. There's some interesting double peaks there as well, where, you know, there's a few different opinions. And this is great because this allows us to use the scenarios and to have different scenario projections depending on different factors like this. Yep, so new build housing out is in front, and as was mentioned, the Future Homes Standard, if that gets passed and if that gets started to be implemented by 2025, it could be a great source of getting these numbers up for heat pump installations. Amazing. Okay, so I think we've got most people's votes there. So yeah, as just mentioned, new build housing and off-gas fossil fuel housing are the two ones that you've kind of picked out there. With on-gas housing being less targeted, I think that makes sense. Obviously, as we've just talked about, off-gas traditionally tend to be where heat pumps are prioritised, at least in the near term. So it's great to get your confirmation of that. Moving on, we're going to look at some resistive electric heating. So resistive electric heating, including electric heaters and electric like kind of night storage heaters and things like that. They're typically common in flats and apartments in city centres and in off-gas areas where traditional gas boilers are not currently available. We can see here that around 6.7% of homes in the southwest are heated by resistive electric heating, which is about similar to the national average. But these can be quite expensive forms of heating and can be affecting the levels of fuel poverty in area as well. So sorry if you can hear a drill in the background, it has just started up. Talking about resistive electric heating, what do you think the role of resistive electric heating will be in a net zero future? So again, we've got a few different scenarios here. We've got will resistive electric heating be used in many dwellings due to it being considered a low carbon fuel source? Will it remain in smaller houses and flats where the heating costs are typically lower? Or will it be replaced by heat pumps and low carbon district heating over time? Perfect, thank you so much for answering. So the current kind of distribution that we see is that it's used in smaller houses and flats. But we're seeing that we don't think it will be fully replaced by heat pumps. We do think it will stay around that. So that's interesting. And as we see, and as we talk about quite a lot at Regen, is that there isn't one solution for everyone. And we support the installation of heat pumps, but that doesn't mean it's suitable for every single house or every single area of the country. So there is going to be a combination of technologies that we see, so heat pumps, resistive electric heating, and different options like that. And in these smaller houses and flats, that potentially is what we might see in the future. So it's great to get your opinion on that. Perfect. Okay, thank you for your votes on that. So I'm going to pass back to Frankie now, which is probably good as this drilling is not stopping. But yes, thank you so much for your votes, and back over to Frankie.
Great. Thanks everyone for engaging with that Menti so far. It's really great to see those answers coming in. So from one source of demand, which is electrified heat, to another, electric vehicles, we'll be presenting some recent thinking and data, and then again asking you a few questions on the topic. So this slide, I won't read out every single thing because it's there and will be shared afterwards, but is really just a up-to-date overview of the UK policy on EVs and electric vehicle chargers. Some things to note is a few of these have changed since the last round of DEFEZ, which was completed in 2020. So at that point, the ban on new petrol and diesel cars was brought forward in line with recommendations from the Committee on Climate Change. So that is something that we represented in the last scenarios, and we'll make sure we've included that update. EV sales we've been keeping an eye on and have been increasing dramatically. It's been really interesting to see whether that's been impacted by COVID-19 with, we're traveling less potentially, or potentially the greater interest in decarbonisation has meant that has continued. We're also really interested in the kind of scale and location of electric vehicle chargers as well, and we are seeing interesting moves there. But yeah, as I said, I won't read through the entire slide because we'll be sharing that in shortly. So here is a map of current uptake, and this is by local authority areas. This is current uptake density, cars and light good vehicles that are plug-in electric. So as you can see, quite a range, but we're still down at the small numbers. So on one sense, electric vehicles really are taking off, and every year we're seeing explosive growth in sales. On the other hand, we know we're at the lower end of a trajectory that over the next decade we'll see potentially complete shift in the way that we fuel our personal and public vehicles. A few stats around here. In some urban areas, we are seeing lower uptake as the early adopters will have seem to have its multiple car houses or areas with more off-street parking where they can charge their electric vehicle more easily. And if it's a second car or a third car, then issues like range anxiety don't seem to be limiting deployment as much. However, there are some urban areas with quite high deployment as well. So you can see there in Bristol and Exeter as well. I'll move on to the next slide. And this is no longer electric vehicles, but electric vehicle charging capacity as well, which is something that is sort of the interface between electric vehicles and the Western Power's distribution network. So that is the kind of key point that we're interested in. And it's obviously early days, and we are looking out at the data coming out from public charging, private charging data sets. We're going to see the patterns that are emerging. Will there be an explosion in workplace charging, for example, and will every workplace encourage its workers to come to work by electric vehicles, or will we see on-street and hub charging in car parks and what we currently think of as petrol stations? Clearly, if you have off-street parking and you can charge at home, that is currently by country mile the best option. So really on this slide, we're talking about non-off-street, non-residential charging, because that is an area where we are interested in the uncertainty and interested in how that will develop over time. So as you can see highlighted in the southwest, we have lower overall charging capacity compared to some of the other areas in the Midlands. However, the split between them is quite interesting, as we see quite a high proportion of destination charges, which in this area is defined as you don't drive there purely to park your vehicle. It's you drive there for a different reason. So, for example, it's a supermarket or a theme park or something like that. It's Flambards down in Cornwall. So this is a potentially interesting area, especially because we know the southwest, there's lots of tourism and parts of the area where the network isn't necessarily used to large generators sited on the distribution network. So this is an area particularly interested in the location, the capacity of those chargers. So in your opinion, what will be the most and least popular solutions to EV charging for on-street parked vehicles? So we've excluded off-street parking, as sort of previously discussed, for we sort of know the location and how popular that will be because of economic reasons. But if you jump onto Mendy.com, how in your area do you see this rolling out? So this one's a ranking one as well. So yeah, we'll wait a few moments to go through that. So interestingly, this is fairly broadly split, and this does represent that slide that I presented just before of the split currently in the southwest. There are lots of sort of destination charging, as we call them, but also a provision of on-street charging as well as others. Destinations that want to bring in customers will clearly have supermarket car parks potential, and now people will be grazing, what's called grazing and slowly charging there. electric vehicles, or will there go to rapid and ultra rapid charging hubs, as we are seeing slowly also developing in the southwest, especially along main trunk roads such as the motorway and service stations? Well, there's a couple more moments on this question, as we are almost at the final question of the slide pack, and therefore almost a final chance to engage with Mendy.com. Okay, so it seems like they're sort of sitting in first place there, charging at destinations, followed by on-street outside homes, with fast and local still popular, but in third and fourth. Thank you so much, everyone, for engaging with that. It's incredibly useful and something that isn't explicitly covered in some of the assumptions around the future energy scenarios, and something we really want to bring in the local evidence for. I've seen a comment in the chat there about tourism and the impact throughout the season on that as well. So thanks very much, everyone, for filling that out. So that was the final slide of the electric vehicles pack, and we'll be moving on now to the Q&A session. So thank you again, everyone, for engaging with Menti, but also all of the comments flooding in on the Zoom Q&A. That is the place to add in your questions. And we have been collating them as the event has gone on. So we'll start with a few questions that have funneled in for Western Power. So these ones will be for you, Ben. So lots of good questions, and apologies that we won't get to all of them. But we have some interesting questions around the annual cycle of DEFEZ. So what will the impact of this year's DEFEZ be on Western Power's investment plans? Is it sort of too late for updates now? It seems you're working on your business plan, and how does that annual cycle feed into Western Power's process? We also have some questions about the maps that were shared. Is the capacity available? I know that Western Power has some great visualization tools as well. So I'll pass back to Ben from Western Power to answer those two.
Excellent, thanks, Frankie. Yeah, some excellent questions there, and we'll try and get through as many as we can in the time that we've got left. But we'll commit to getting back on each of those individual points, because there's some really good questions. So particularly on the timetable for our business plan and the cycle for this year's DEFEZ, then our business plan needs to be with the regulator in a finalised form for the 1st of December, and our annual publication date for the full DEFEZ pack is towards the end of December. So there's a slight mismatch in terms of timing for this year's DEFEZ to be fully available. However, we're starting the engagement early now, and we're starting to draw all that information. So it very much will be pulled into our business plans and inform that, albeit perhaps more on a kind of sensitivity analysis based on the previous engagement and last year's DEFEZ, rather than actually having all the concrete numbers from it. One of the most important things about how we use the DEFEZ process back into our business planning is about ascertaining what the ambition and what the delivery capability within the local authority areas is, so that we can assign a correct DEFEZ scenario. And that exercise will be starting with our senior managers over the next few weeks. So we really hope that we get some good engagement. We can hear about what the plans are for decarbonisation, and whether it fits that 2050 glide path, or whether it's a bit more accelerated. And we'll be very much using that evidence to add towards our investment plans for this year. In terms of providing capacity, then one thing that I want to make really clear is that for any low carbon technology connecting onto the network, that is very much in WPD's remit and gift to be able to provide confidence that any domestic customer connecting low carbon technologies can connect onto the network, and there will be enough capacity available. We are working with the regulator to make sure that we've got enough funding available to us, and that the ways that we approach that funding are put onto the right numbers of customers, and that it's not hitting those customers that can poorly afford it or perhaps suffering fuel poverty. So there's a few sort of challenges that we need to work with that. But really, the main thing that I want to get across is that we are 100% gearing up to be able to deliver all of the additional capacity that is required for decarbonisation. So there really shouldn't be any worries about whether capacity will not be available. There is a good question on making sure that capacity is available at the right times, and we've got some great tools in terms of flexibility to be able to hedge that a little bit. But this is why this engagement is so important, that we really need to gauge the strength of feeling and the evidence that some of the local authorities have got, and other major stakeholders, home builders, other big developers, about what's in their pipeline, what they're going to needing, and when they're going to be needing it, so that we can then ascribe a particular level of confidence for that and build that back into our business case.
Great, thanks, Ben. We've got a question that I might pass over to you, Grace, which is around building in local ambitions for net zero sooner than 2050. So some declarations of climate emergency, for example, 2030, 2035. So I'll just come to you for that, Grace. But before that, I think there's a comment in the chat or just clarification around the energy storage map that may have been missing. A 50 megawatt site near Newton Abbot. It's potentially that's transmission connected at that scale. But if you are aware of the sites that were missing from that map and our distribution network connected, then please do get in touch and we'll just make sure that we do have it, if it's operational or in the pipeline site, that we'll do include that in our analysis. I'll pass that question over to you then, Grace.
Yeah, no, great point. Thanks, Frankie. Yeah, so we do acknowledge that. And as we said at the beginning, the FES scenarios we work off, 2 are net zero by 2050, 1 is net zero by 2048, and the other one doesn't meet net zero targets at all. And the way that we try and capture local ambition is we have already in the process of doing questionnaires to local authorities. So hopefully all local authorities in the Southwest area should have received communication from us asking them to fill out a questionnaire in which we do ask about your ambitions, not only just in terms of net zero emissions, but in terms of specific technologies. And then we hope to capture that through our modelling. But we also use local ambition as some of the kind of deployment factors for different technologies. For example, if we're looking at hydrogen, we might look at any hydrogen strategies that places have and try and incorporate the fact that they have these and that they've made an active start on these. However, it is obviously very difficult for us to reflect every single local authority and their ambition. Just due to the scale of this analysis, we are covering all 4 of WPD's licence areas. And so it's not as detailed as like a local area energy plan would be, but we do incorporate the ambition of the local authority through those engagement events and through any documents. So if you do have any ambitions or documents you'd like to share with us, please do get in contact and we're happy to have conversations with you after the event. Thanks, Frankie.
And there's maybe links as well to, I know the Western Power distribution managers take the DEFEZ results and then take that back to local authorities as well to discuss their local ambitions. So perhaps you want to touch on that. And we also have a couple of questions in around availability for capacity in new developments. There's a question about large developers in Bristol with concerns about capacity for electrification of heating transport as well. And I know that new developments is a real critical part of this analysis as it kind of gives you visibility of those sites. So perhaps you want to touch on those 2 points.
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of the engagement that we do through our business, our senior distribution managers have close relationships with local authorities. They are the go-to manager of those particular areas to sort out any operational issues, faults and local planning issues. We use their skills and their relationships to seek further clarity on ambition from the local authorities in terms of what their plan is, and that's supported by my team as well. We're again for this year we'll be going out to all 129 local authorities within our area, and also engaging with some of the LEPs to present our DEFEZ data and from the 2020 DEFEZ, explain the range of credible scenarios that we are expecting and really seeking a bit of input about where the local authorities are pitching their vision of the pathway. And we can start using that as a real good source of data and collaboration to try and co-create their own local area energy strategies and make sure that they feature heavily within our business plans as well, so that they're mirrored. In terms of new connections, then naturally when new capacity is broken ground and new developments are being broken ground and new infrastructure is being rolled out in particular areas, we would expect the local developers to be contributing to the reinforcement where that is being triggered, and that's part of the connections charging methodology that's agreed by the regulator. That is definitely the process that goes on now, although we recognise that Ofgem are looking at how charging is apportioned across different customer subsets through the significant code review, and we're eagerly awaiting a further consultation coming out in the future on that. So there might be a little bit of a change around that. Certainly we would like to push towards more of the charges being levied against the distribution network operators, so that we can undertake more strategic investment rather than it being put to individual customers to trigger that off. We certainly think that that would accelerate decarbonisation and hopefully take some of the issues around gaining capacity from individual customers and make it more of a whole network problem. But again, that will really need to be teased out within that significant code review. So we'll welcome people to make sure that they're involved with the discussions on that.
Great, and thanks everyone for joining us for this session. We are about to run out of time, but we do have so many questions that we'll probably be able to get one or two more in. But thanks very much everyone for joining so far. I really do appreciate it. Any questions that we haven't got to will be documented in the stakeholder engagement report, and please do get in touch with any further thoughts. I've seen lots of comments, lots of great comments and questions, so do get in touch with the network innovation team at Western Power or the DEFEZ team at Regen. So a question that's come in around on-street charging. So we were just discussing there around the locations of it. Will we be in charging hubs? Will it be any on-street chargers? Is there Western Power plans for the variety of on-street charging versus charging hubs? And clarification on whether you need 3-phase cabling for a domestic scale for on-street charging, Ben, and will the expense of that mean that we'll go down a different route for charging electric vehicles?
Good. So 3-phase servicing for domestic properties is something that we've championed within WPD. We did a consultation, I believe, last year, looking at super fast charging. We believe that there is a fairly negligible cost to make that the de facto standard, and we'll really be pushing for that to happen on a national basis. So we're hoping that this is going to be something considered by the future home standard. But in terms of current capacity for domestic charging, then a standard single phase property connection into the property can deliver quite a volume of energy, certainly much more than what it's rated or what it needs to do for the standard domestic consumption. There are a few issues around unlooping of services where we've bundled them together, but that's something that we're looking to make significant investment in over our next business in our business plan for our next price control, in terms of ensuring that those are taken out and there are no sort of service barriers for domestic charging. Looking at the flavour of electric vehicle charging, then I think this is one of the critical areas that we really like to work together with the local authorities to understand what the flavour is likely to be in those particular area. We recognise that local authorities won't really be in a position to be able to make that decision unilaterally on their own, but they should be a really good bellwether to be able to understand what industry constituents and the local kind of planning framework will allow in terms of those particular flavours of vehicle charging, and then we'd be really keen to kind of co-create how EV charging is going to happen in a particular local area and ensure that flows back into our investment. For instance, if we know that super hub charging is going to be very prevalent in a particular area, that might mean that we can back off some of the investment on the low voltage networks that we're making. So making sure that we have a really good understanding of how that's going to be deployed is something that we're very keen on. We think local authorities will be a very good conduit for that in the local area energy plans, but of course it could be that that is going to be driven by the market and by industry as well. So again, we're keen to hear different thoughts about how we can sort of best capture that and make sure that our business plan is reflective of that.
Lovely, thanks Ben. We are well and truly over now, so thank you everyone for attending. We do really appreciate your feedback, and we'll be over the next few months incorporating that all into the analysis stage of the DEFEZ. As Ben said, the results will be being published around December time. Thanks everyone again for attending. There is a final Menti question if you want as you leave, which we won't flash up, but it is just on how you found the event today. But we will also be sending up a follow-up email with all the links that have been discussed in today's discussion, as well as the slides and the questions. So do look out for that, but also, yeah, if you do have any thoughts, just fill in that final Menti question. Thanks again, everyone, for joining.